He laughed, not a quiet laugh, not even a cruel one. It was the kind of laugh that comes from a man who has never once been afraid of consequences. Loose, easy, like he was telling a joke at a bar instead of dismantling a woman's entire reason for living. She's useful, Celeste. That's all she's ever been. A shield with a last name. Imani Whitaker stood frozen in the hallway outside that private lounge, rain hammering the windows of one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants, her anniversary surprise still clutched in her hand. A reservation card, hand-lettered, for the table where they had their first dinner. She didn't drop it. She just stood there and let his words rewrite every memory she had. If that were you, if you heard the person who was supposed to love you reduce 3 years of your life to a strategy, what would you do? Would you walk in there and confront him? Would you fall apart? Or would something go very quiet inside you, the way it does right before something breaks permanently? Imani did none of those things. She simply turned around and walked back into the rain. And the man inside that room had absolutely no idea that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Before we go further, if stories like this are what you come here for, please subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Imani did next, you need to understand exactly what she came from. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon, and by the time Imani's car pulled up to Renzo's, the kind of Manhattan restaurant that doesn't have a sign out front because if you don't already know where it is, you weren't invited. It was coming down hard enough to blur the streetlights into smears of gold and white. She had planned this for 2 weeks. That detail matters, because Imani Whitaker was not a spontaneous woman. She was not the type to show up somewhere unannounced, to perform grand gestures, to make herself the center of any room. She had learned, slowly, and without realizing it was happening, to take up as little space as possible, to wait to be invited before she entered, to apologize before she asked for anything. 3 years of marriage to Roman Vescari had a way of teaching you those things without a single lesson being spoken aloud. But tonight was their anniversary, and Imani had decided, quietly, the way she made all her decisions, that she was going to try. She'd bought a new dress, dark green, fitted, the kind she usually talked herself out of at the last moment, and replaced with something looser, safer, less like she was asking to be looked at. She'd made a reservation under a false name at a corner table where the lighting was soft and the noise from the bar couldn't reach. She'd written the card herself, her handwriting careful and looping on the thick cream paper. 3 years. I'm still here. I still choose you. She was going to slide it across the table and watch his face. That was the whole plan. Just that small, fragile thing. Roman had texted her at 6 that he was finishing up a dinner with clients at Renzo's. He hadn't invited her. He never did. But she knew the layout of the restaurant. She'd been there twice with her father, Solomon, back when Solomon was still the kind of man who walked into rooms and made people straighten their spines without being asked. She knew about the private lounge on the 2nd floor, accessible from the back corridor, where men like Roman conducted the parts of their business they preferred to keep off the main floor. She told herself she wasn't checking up on him. She almost believed it. The hostess recognized her. She was Solomon Whitaker's daughter, after all, which in certain Manhattan circles was the kind of recognition that opened doors without a word being said, and offered to escort her up. Imani shook her head, said she wanted to surprise him. The hostess smiled the way people smile when they are carefully not saying something, and Imani noticed it and filed it away in the part of herself she had trained not to speak up. She took the back corridor alone. The lounge had double doors, old wood, thick enough that voices from inside reached the hallway only as murmur and texture. Imani had nearly convinced herself this was foolish, that she should wait at the corner table downstairs like a normal person, that whatever she thought she was about to find was just anxiety talking. And then she heard the laugh. Roman's laugh was one of the first things she had loved about him. It was unguarded in a way the rest of him never was. Roman in public was controlled, precise, watchful, every word measured before it left his mouth, every expression calibrated for effect. But when something genuinely struck him as funny, something shifted, and for a moment you saw the man underneath the architecture. She had mistaken that glimpsed man for who he actually was. She heard him say something low, something she couldn't catch. And then she heard a woman's voice. Low, amused, intimate in the way that voices get when the two people speaking have an established physical ease with each other. Imani knew that voice. Celeste Arden had been at the periphery of their world for 2 years. Roman's associate. The kind of beautiful that was its own form of professional credential in certain circles. She moved through rooms the way expensive things move, drawing attention without appearing to seek it. Imani had asked about her exactly once, and Roman had given her a look that she could not have described precisely, but that had made her feel foolish for asking, and so she had never asked again. She stood in the hallway, and her hand was flat against the door, and she was not going to open it. She wasn't. She was going to walk back downstairs and sit at that corner table and wait. And when Roman eventually came down, she was going to hand him the card and ask him to order for her because the menu always made her anxious, and she has no idea, does she? Celeste's voice, not a question. An observation delivered with the casual certainty of someone who has been told the answer already and is simply confirming it. Imani? Roman's voice, warm with something Imani had not heard directed at herself in months. She thinks this marriage is real. A pause. The sound of glass on a table. Is that cruel? Celeste asked, still not particularly troubled by the question. It's practical. Roman said it the way he said most things. Like the word itself was the final argument, and anyone who disagreed simply hadn't thought it through. Solomon controls every port between here and Boston. The union contracts, the warehouse leases, the customs relationships. All of it flows through him. You want to move anything in this city without paying a toll to 3 different organizations, you need Solomon Whitaker's goodwill. Marrying his daughter was the fastest way to get inside that structure without triggering a negotiation I wasn't ready to win. And now? Now I've been inside the structure for 3 years. I know where everything is. I know who owes what to whom. I know which political relationships are real and which ones are performance. He paused. When Solomon dies, and he won't last another year, the man has been sick since last spring. Everything he built passes into family control. And Imani is the family. So she passes to you. Everything she touches passes to me. That's what marriage means when one party understands it and the other one doesn't. Silence on Celeste's side. Then, and after? After. Roman made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Imani gets a very generous settlement and a quiet life somewhere. She'll be comfortable. She was never part of the plan. She was the door. Once you're inside, you don't need the door anymore. Imani's hand was still flat against the wood. She was aware, in a distant clinical way, that her body had stopped breathing normally, that the reservation card in her other hand was creasing where she'd tightened her fingers around it without noticing. 3 years. I still choose you. She stared at those words in her own handwriting. She must know something's wrong, Celeste said, not sympathetically, more like a puzzle she was examining from a comfortable distance. Women always know. Imani, that warm amusement again, aimed at her now, in her absence, which was its own particular form of violence. She knows I'm not warm. She knows I work late. She tells herself I'm building something for us. A beat. She's been telling herself that story for 3 years because the alternative is admitting that a woman like her couldn't actually hold a man like me. She's too scared of that to look clearly at what's in front of her. A woman like her. There it was. Imani had spent years in the company of people who were careful never to say those 3 words where she could hear them. But she had always known they were there, present in the half-second pause before certain compliments, in the specific quality of surprise when she said something sharp or incisive, in the way Roman's business associates would greet her with elaborate courtesy that had nothing behind it, the way you're polite to furniture. She had thought Roman was different. She had believed, and this was the part that was going to take her a long time to excavate. She understood that even in this moment, she had believed that Roman saw something the others didn't, that his attention, 3 years ago, when he had pursued her with a focus she had never experienced before, meant that he had looked past the surface and found something worth wanting. It had not occurred to her, not once, to ask what he was looking for underneath. She stepped back from the door. One step, then another, moving quietly on instinct, the way you move when you are carrying something fragile. She turned around in that narrow corridor and she walked back toward the stairs, and she kept her face completely still, which took everything she had because the hostess was still at the bottom of the stairs, and Imani was not going to give this restaurant the story of what had just happened to her. Outside, the rain hit her before she got her umbrella open, and she stood on the sidewalk in her new dress with the reservation card dissolving slightly in the wet, and she breathed. Not crying. She was aware of that, surprised by it almost. She had expected to cry. What she felt instead was something she didn't have a word for yet, something that had texture, something that had edges. She got into the car. She sat in the back seat while her driver waited for instructions. She looked at the card. 3 years. I still choose you. The ink had smeared at one corner. She folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Home, she said. The driver pulled away from Renzo's, and Imani watched the restaurant's unmarked door disappear into the rain, and she began, quietly and methodically, to think. The weeks that followed were the strangest of her life. She went home that night, and she did not confront Roman when he came in at midnight, smelling faintly of cigarettes and Celeste's perfume, which she now recognized precisely because she had always noticed it and always chosen not to name it. She said she had a headache and went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to him move around the apartment and thought, how long have I been doing this? Not a question, a measurement. She had married Roman Vescari at 31, later than most of her father's social circle expected, having spent her 20s being largely invisible in rooms full of people who found her father interesting. Roman Whitaker was a difficult man to stand next to if you were not already certain of yourself. He filled space without effort, not with cruelty, but with that particular gravitational pull of men who have built something real and know it. People leaned toward him at parties. His stories always ended with everyone laughing at exactly the right moment. He was not a warm father, but he was a present one, which Imani had spent most of her adult life confusing with love. When Roman appeared, at a charity event Solomon was headlining, at the table where Imani had been sitting alone while her father worked the room, she had been taken apart by the simple fact of his attention. He had sat down across from her without being invited. He had asked her questions and then waited for the answers, actually waited, in a way that men in her father's world rarely did with her. He had looked at her directly for long enough that she felt visible, which was not a feeling she was accustomed to. She had not been naive about who he was. She had known Roman Vescari moved through the underside of the shipping and logistics world, had known that his money came from arrangements. Her father understood and sanctioned without spelling out, had known that the men who came to see him at odd hours were not associates in any conventional sense. She had known all of this, and she had decided it didn't change what she felt, which was wanted. It had never once occurred to her that wanted and useful could feel identical from the inside. She lay in the dark and understood that she had spent 3 years being cherished by a man who was actually conducting an inventory. By morning, something had hardened in her. She didn't show it. That was important. Roman was good at reading people. It was one of the tools of his trade. And if he saw that she knew, the game changed in ways she wasn't ready for. So she performed. She made coffee and asked how his dinner had gone and listened to him describe a fictional business meeting with the focused attention she had always given him, and she watched his eyes while he spoke, and she thought, "You are very good at this." But so was she. She had grown up watching Solomon Whitaker negotiate, and the first thing Solomon had ever told her about negotiation was this: the person who knows the most about what the other person needs always wins. The only variable is whether they choose to use it. Roman thought Imani didn't know anything. That was her first advantage. She began, carefully and quietly, to learn what she didn't already know. Her father's study was the last room in the world Roman would think to look. Solomon had died. Quickly, mercifully, the doctor said, as though the manner of it could offset the fact of it, 6 weeks after that night at Renzo's, and the study had remained more or less untouched since the ambulance came. Roman had made a show of sensitivity about it, telling Imani he didn't want to intrude on her grief, which she now read for what it actually was. He was waiting for the right moment to begin systematically examining Solomon's records, and he didn't want to seem too eager. He was, she understood, a patient man. She went into the study on a Tuesday afternoon when Roman was out, and she sat in her father's chair, and she looked at the desk, and she said quietly, to the empty room, "Okay, Papa, what did you leave me?" Solomon Whitaker had not been a sentimental man, but he had been an organized one. He had also, it turned out, been considerably more perceptive about Roman Vescari than he had ever let on while he was alive. The first document she found was a letter, handwritten, in a sealed envelope labeled "For Imani, when the time comes," which told her that her father had known, or at least suspected, that a time would come, and that he had chosen not to tell her while he was alive, which she would be angry about for a long time before she understood why he hadn't. She read the letter 3 times. Then she sat very still for a while. Then she opened the locked drawer. The key was taped to the underside of the middle desk shelf, which was exactly where she would have hidden something if she had been Solomon Whitaker, and she found it on the second pass of her hand, and she read the documents inside. By the time Roman came home that evening, Imani understood something she had not understood before. The empire her father had built did not belong to Roman. It did not belong to the Union captains, or the political contacts, or the port authorities, or any of the men who had spent 3 years cultivating Roman's favor because they believed the inheritance had passed to him. It belonged to her. Not the surface of it, not the name, not the public structure, not the face of it that men like Roman could see and touch and point to. Solomon had left Roman exactly enough to believe he had won. The offices, the titled properties, the company registrations, the handshake relationships that everyone could observe. But the actual foundation of it, the offshore accounts, the controlling interests in 4 of the 6 major trusts, the political leverage that was worth more than all the real estate combined, the confidential records of every arrangement Solomon had made over 30 years of building this thing, all of that had been moved, quietly and legally, months before Solomon died, into Imani's name. Her father had seen Roman clearly. He had simply chosen to wait and see if Roman would be what he feared, and when it became clear that he would, Solomon Whitaker had done what he always did when a negotiation was going wrong. He had changed the game without the other party knowing the game had changed. Imani sat in that chair for a long time. There were tears at some point, though she barely registered them. Not for the marriage. For her father, who had protected her from a distance without being able to tell her he was doing it, and who was now gone, and who had trusted her, even knowing she hadn't known what she was capable of, to figure out what to do next. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She put the documents back exactly as she'd found them. She went upstairs and she made dinner, and she sat across from Roman at the table they had shared for 3 years, and she looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time, and she thought, "You have no idea." Roman smiled at her over his wine glass. She smiled back. And somewhere beneath that smile, quiet and cold and utterly unfamiliar to her, something that felt very much like power began to wake up. The morning Roman left for what he called a weekend in Atlantic City. Just business. You know how DeLuca gets. Imani stood at the kitchen window and watched his car pull out of the garage, and she counted to 60 before she moved. Not because she needed the time to steel herself. She had already done that over the past 6 weeks, in the dark, in silence, in the space between sleeping and waking where the truth sits without the courtesy of softening itself. She counted to 60 because she had learned from watching Roman that patience was not the same thing as hesitation, and the people who confused the two were the ones who got caught. At 60, she went upstairs. She changed out of her robe into clothes she could move in, dark slacks, a plain sweater, flat shoes. She pulled her hair back. She did not look in the mirror while she did it, not out of the old reflex of avoidance, but because there was simply nothing she needed from her reflection right now. She knew what she looked like. She knew what she was about to do. She went to her father's study, took the documents from the locked drawer, and spread them across the desk. She had been back to this room 11 times in 6 weeks, always when Roman was out, always for exactly as long as she could account for with some other explanation if he asked. She had read every page. She had cross-referenced the account numbers against the trust registration Solomon had filed through a law firm in Delaware that Roman had never heard of, because Solomon had used them specifically to avoid the overlap with his primary legal team, who reported to Roman in ways Solomon had discovered and said nothing about. She had called the Delaware firm from a prepaid phone she'd bought at a drugstore in Queens, identified herself using the code phrase Solomon had written in the letter, and spent 40 minutes on the phone with a woman named Patricia Osei, the firm's senior partner, who'd been expecting her call for months, and whose voice, when she heard Imani identify herself correctly, had shifted from careful professional neutrality to something that was almost relief. "Your father was very specific," Patricia had said. "He wanted you to have time. He said, these are his words, she'll know when she's ready, and she won't need anyone to tell her." Imani had stood in the drugstore parking lot, in the October cold and pressed the phone against her ear and thought about what kind of man builds a legal fortress around his daughter, while also being the kind of man who couldn't say I love you without it coming out sideways. "I'm ready," she had told Patricia. "I know," Patricia said. "You called." Now in the study, Imani went through everything one more time, not because she'd forgotten anything, because she needed to feel the weight of it before she started moving. Roman was in Atlantic City. Actually in Atlantic City, she had confirmed this through a method she was not proud of but did not regret, which involved a contact of her father's in the hospitality industry who owed Solomon a favor that had now transferred to her. Roman was there with Celeste. He would be back Sunday night, expecting to find his wife exactly where he had left her, quiet, slightly anxious, grateful for whatever portion of his attention he chose to give her on his return. She had approximately 60 hours. She took the most critical documents, the offshore account records, the trust authorization papers, 3 specific folders from the back of the drawer that Solomon had marked with nothing but a small red dot in the corner, which she had learned contained the kind of information that made powerful men very uncomfortable, and she placed them in a bag she had prepared 2 days earlier. She took Roman's personal safe, which she had the combination to because he had given it to her 18 months ago when he had a kidney stone and thought he might need emergency surgery, and she photographed every document inside it with the methodical thoroughness of someone who understood that you only get one pass at this. Then she went to their bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed. His side, which she had not sat on since, she couldn't actually remember. She looked at the nightstand. There was a book he'd been reading, a glass he'd left a water ring under, his watch charger with no watch on it because he was wearing the watch in Atlantic City. She took her wedding ring off. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not a symbolic one, at least not in the way that symbolic gestures are usually performed. With tears, with significance, with someone watching. There was nobody watching. She just took it off and held it in her palm for a moment, looking at it, and then she set it on his nightstand, on top of his book, where he would see it the moment he walked in Sunday night, and before he had a chance to compose himself. She wrote nothing to accompany it. There was nothing left to say that the ring's absence didn't already say more clearly. She picked up her bag, walked downstairs, and called a car. She was at JFK by noon. She was in the air by 3. Roman Vescari did not become what he was by being slow to recognize a change in atmospheric pressure. He'd grown up in a household where the mood of any given morning could determine the safety of the entire day, and he had developed early the particular vigilance of a child who learns to read environments the way other people read words, automatically, below the level of conscious thought, as a survival skill. He walked into rooms and knew within 30 seconds whether the balance of power had shifted since he'd last been there. He could tell when someone was lying by the specific way their sentence construction changed, not the content but the rhythm, the pauses in different places than usual. He came back from Atlantic City on Sunday night feeling good. The weekend had gone well. DeLuca had agreed to the terms Roman wanted, which meant the cargo routing through the Newark facility would shift under Roman's operational control starting in January, which meant that when Solomon's estate fully settled and the financial authority transferred, which Roman's lawyers were telling him would happen within the quarter, he would have the Newark infrastructure already in place and running. He had planned this for a long time. He walked into the apartment at 9:40, dropped his bag in the entryway, and noticed immediately that the apartment was quiet in the wrong way. Not the quiet of someone asleep or in another room. The quiet of an apartment where no one had been for a while. He stood in the entryway and he listened. Nothing. He walked to the kitchen. Clean. Dishes done, surfaces wiped. Not unusual. Imani was fastidious. But the coffee maker was unplugged, which she never did. He walked upstairs. He saw the ring before he fully registered what it meant, and then his brain caught up and he stood very still in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment with his jacket still on and his bag strap still in his hand. On his nightstand. On top of his book. A gold ring that he had placed on her finger 3 years ago in a ceremony he had considered primarily as an infrastructure investment and had nonetheless found, to his own irritation, briefly moving. No note. He put his bag down slowly. He called her phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording, careful and precise, the way she spoke when she was performing composure. "You've reached Imani. Please leave a message." "Call me," he said. He hung up and stood in the middle of the bedroom and did the thing he rarely permitted himself. He thought about what he might have missed. He came up empty. She'd been quiet lately, but Imani was often quiet. He ran through the past 6 weeks with the detached precision of someone reviewing footage, present, functional. She'd made dinner 3 times last week. She'd asked about his work with the specific, unfocused politeness of a woman who is asking to seem interested rather than because she wants to know, which was honestly how she had always asked. Nothing had been different. He called again at 10:15, voicemail. He poured himself a drink and sat in the living room and told himself she had gone to visit her college friend in Connecticut. What was her name? Diane, the one who'd gotten divorced. And she would call him in the morning, embarrassed about leaving without telling him, and he would be appropriately understanding about it, and they would move on. He went to bed. He did not sleep. By Monday afternoon, Roman had called 6 times and received no answer. He had also called the Connecticut friend, whose name he found in Imani's contacts on the shared tablet they used for household things, and discovered that Diane had not seen or heard from Imani in 2 months. He sat in his office, the one in the financial district that was registered to a consulting firm with 3 employees and 6 times the square footage needed for 3 employees. And he thought very carefully. The first thing he thought was, she found out about Celeste. This was uncomfortable but manageable. Women found out about Celeste eventually. He had navigated this before, with 2 different women in 2 different cities, and in both cases the formula was the same. Contrition, presence, the specific quality of attention that people who had been invisible their whole lives found almost impossible to resist. Imani would come home. She would cry. He would hold her and be patient, and she would decide that leaving was too frightening and loving him was what she knew how to do. He had done this before. He was very good at it. The second thing he thought, which he pushed away immediately and then couldn't keep pushed away, was, what if it's not about Celeste? He opened his laptop. He pulled up the financial monitoring system his accountant ran, which tracked the major accounts and flagged unusual activity. It was routine. He checked it every Monday morning as a matter of habit. Everything looked normal. He exhaled. Then, because he was who he was, he called his accountant directly. His name was Bryce, a careful little man who had been managing Roman's visible finances for 4 years, and who understood implicitly that the visible finances were the smaller portion of what needed managing. Pull everything, Roman said. All accounts. Full review. Something specific you're looking for? No, just pull it. Bryce called him back in an hour. Everything's clean, Bryce said. Actually, everything's exactly where it should be. Looks fine. Roman hung up and stared at the wall. Everything's exactly where it should be. He did not know why that sentence bothered him. He ordered dinner, ate half of it, and went back to the apartment. He stood in Solomon's study, which he had been avoiding. Out of the performance of sensitivity he no longer needed to maintain but had gotten into the habit of, and looked at Solomon's desk, and he opened the center drawer. Papers. The kind of administrative paperwork that accumulates around a large estate. Correspondence, invoice copies, nothing significant. He opened the side drawer. More of the same. He opened the locked drawer. He had the combination, had obtained it from Solomon's assistant 3 weeks after the funeral in a conversation he had framed as a state administrative necessity. And he looked at what was inside. He had looked before. He looked now. The files were there. The folders were there. It took him almost 4 minutes to realize that one folder was missing. A folder he had noted on his first pass, 3 weeks after Solomon's death, and logged in his mental inventory of things to examine more thoroughly later. A thin folder with a small red dot in the corner, unremarkable in appearance, which he had assumed contained something minor, correspondence maybe, or copies of documents whose originals were held elsewhere. It wasn't there. He went through everything twice. Gone. He sat in Solomon's chair and pressed his fingers against his mouth and breathed through his nose and thought, how long? He found out about Switzerland on Tuesday. Not directly. He found it through a chain of phone calls that started with her driver, whom Roman had been paying a small additional sum for years to report on Imani's movements, which had never troubled him until now when the information was flowing in the wrong direction, who told him that he had taken Imani to JFK on Saturday at noon. International Terminal. Which carriers flew out of JFK International with connections to Geneva? Roman did not need to look up because Roman knew airport logistics the way other men knew their own phone numbers. He sat with that for a while. Switzerland. He thought about what was in Switzerland. The banking infrastructure, the account structures that Solomon had built over 30 years of moving money in ways that were technically legal and practically invisible. The kind of accounts that could not be accessed without specific authorization codes that Solomon had held personally and that had, upon his death, become part of the estate, part of Imani's estate. Roman put his phone down on his desk very carefully. He had always assumed. He examined this assumption now with the cold precision of a man who has just found a crack in a wall he thought was structural. He had assumed that Imani's inheritance was formal, nominal, the kind of transfer that happens when a powerful man dies and his estate passes to the nearest family member, but where the actual operational authority migrates naturally to the people who know how to use it, which was him, which had always been going to be him. He had not considered the possibility that Solomon had been more specific. He had not considered it because he had not believed Solomon trusted Imani with the real machinery. Solomon was a man of his generation in certain respects, and in Roman's experience, men of Solomon's generation and Solomon's world did not hand the engine room over to their daughters. They left them comfortable. They left them provided for. But the actual infrastructure, the accounts, the authority, the leverage. He picked up his phone. He called Patricia Osei's office in Delaware. He was told Miss Osei was unavailable. He called back 2 hours later. Still unavailable. He sent an email, carefully worded, identifying himself as Solomon Whitaker's son-in-law and a principal in the estate administration, requesting a call at earliest convenience regarding several matters of account continuity. He received, 12 minutes later, a response so brief it bordered on insulting. Miss Osei notes that all estate matters are being handled through the designated estate representative. If you believe you have a separate inquiry, please direct it to our administrative team. Roman read it twice. The designated estate representative. Not him. He put the phone face down on the desk. He sat with the understanding that was assembling itself in his chest like something being built out of cold material, piece by piece, without asking his permission. He had played this wrong. Not tactically wrong. The tactics had been fine. The marriage, the patience, the cultivation of Solomon's trust, while simultaneously building the infrastructure to absorb Solomon's empire the moment it became available. All of that had been sound. He had done nothing that another man in his position would not have done. He had played it wrong in the way that competent men sometimes play things wrong, which is the hardest kind of wrong to accept. He had underestimated someone he had decided, very early and without enough evidence, was not worth the effort of truly calculating. He picked up his phone and called Imani. It went to voicemail on the first ring this time. She had declined the call, which meant she was there. She was present, holding the phone, and she had looked at his name on the screen and pressed the button that said no. He put the phone down and looked at the wall and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something he did not have a comfortable relationship with. Uncertainty. The week that followed was the longest of Roman Vescari's professional life, and he had lived through some weeks that he would not have thought anything could exceed. It started with the shipping accounts. On Wednesday morning, his operations manager, a compact, efficient woman named Kira, who ran the practical side of the Newark routing with a minimum of conversation and a maximum of results, called to say that 2 of the major union contracts had hit unexpected snags. Not broken, not canceled, just stuck. Pending review by the Union Administrative Board, which had not reviewed anything in 4 years because the Administrative Board had been, for all practical purposes, a rubber stamp. What do they mean review, Roman said. They're saying routine oversight, new compliance measures. Could take 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Or more, Kira said, in the tone of someone delivering information they did not generate and would prefer not to be associated with. Roman ended the call and immediately called his contact at the Union Board, a man named Terrence, who had been receiving a monthly payment from Roman's operational budget for going on 6 years, and who had, in all that time, never once initiated a review of anything without Roman's explicit request. Terrence did not answer. Roman left a message. Terrence did not call back. On Thursday, the international accounts showed their first anomaly. Not frozen. He would deal with frozen. He had procedures for frozen. They simply didn't respond the way they should have. A transfer he initiated through the Luxembourg structure came back with an error code he had never seen before. He called his contact at the bank. The contact was politely, extravagantly unhelpful in the specific way that banking contacts become unhelpful when someone has gotten to them first. There are compliance reviews ongoing for a number of accounts, the contact told him. I'm sure it will resolve quickly. Resolve quickly, Roman repeated. Yes, these things typically do. They both knew that was not a statement of fact. It was an exit from a conversation. Roman hung up and called his lawyer, a man named Foster, who operated out of an office in Midtown, and who had, over 12 years, developed an almost preternatural ability to stay calm in situations that would have broken lesser men. I need to know the full extent of what Imani controls, Roman said. Everything. Not the public estate, not the titled properties. The actual foundation of what Solomon built. Foster was quiet for a moment that lasted a beat too long. Roman, he said, don't do that. Don't do the voice, just tell me. I'm not the right person to ask, Foster said, because I don't know. Solomon conducted a significant portion of his structural arrangements through counsel I wasn't party to. I've been aware of this for some time, but I had no specific reason to. You had every reason, Roman said. I'm paying you to know these things. You're paying me to protect your interests within the scope of what I'm given access to, Foster said. And there was something in his voice that Roman had never heard from him before, which was the specific careful quality of a man who is choosing his words because he is no longer certain where this conversation is going. If Solomon structured portions of the estate outside my visibility, I can't retroactively access that. And find someone who can. Roman. Another pause. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Ask it. How much of what you've been building in the last 3 years is dependent on the Whitaker infrastructure? Not adjacent to it, dependent on it. Roman said nothing. Because if the answer is significantly, Foster said, then the conversation we need to be having is a different one than the one you called me to have. Roman ended the call. He sat in his office and looked at the city through the glass and thought about the word dependent, which was a word he had never applied to himself, and thought about how precisely and specifically and with what extraordinary patience Solomon Whitaker had apparently done the one thing Roman would have said, if asked 3 months ago, that Solomon was incapable of doing. Solomon had protected her, not with lawyers or security or the performative apparatus that rich men use when they want to demonstrate care, with something much more dangerous, with information, with structure, with the very machinery Roman had spent 3 years maneuvering to inherit, placed quietly and irrevocably in the hands of the woman Roman had decided was too uncertain of herself to use it. He stood up. He walked to the window. He looked at the Hudson in the distance, gray and cold in the November light. His phone rang. He looked at the screen expecting Foster or Kira or Terrence finally calling back. It was a number he didn't recognize, Geneva area code. He answered. Mr. Vescari, said a voice he had never heard. Male, neutral, with the specific flatness of someone trained to convey nothing through tone. My name is Grant Mercer. I represent certain interests connected to the Whitaker estate. I'm calling as a professional courtesy. Roman's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of courtesy? He said. The kind that tells you, before you continue making calls that won't be returned, that the accounts you're attempting to access are no longer within your operational scope. The union contract's pending review will remain pending. The Luxembourg structure has been suspended. The Newark routing agreement is under renegotiation by the party who actually controls the relevant contracts. Roman let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds before he spoke. Who are you? He said. I told you, Grant Mercer. I mean, who do you work for? I work for the Whitaker estate, Mercer said. Specifically, I work for the estate representative. Another silence. Put her on, Roman said. She's not available. She's my wife. Yes, Mercer said, with the measured quality of someone making a correction they find mildly interesting. She's aware of that. Tell her, Mr. Vescari. Not unkind, not aggressive, purely informational. I'm going to give you a piece of advice that you can do whatever you like with. The people you've been calling this week, the union contacts, the banking contacts, the political relationships you've built over the past 3 years through the Whitaker infrastructure, they're not going to help you. Not because they don't want to, because the authority that made them useful to you has moved. You can spend the next month making phone calls that go unanswered, or you can make a different kind of decision. What decision? That's not my area, Mercer said. Good afternoon. The call ended. Roman stood at the window with the phone in his hand and the city spread out in front of him. And for the first time since he was a boy in a household where the weather could change without warning, he felt the specific cold quality of being exposed, of having been in a room without realizing the exits had been quietly, methodically, and with remarkable thoroughness sealed behind him while he wasn't looking. He thought about Imani standing in her green dress. He thought about the way she smiled at him across the dinner table in the weeks after her father died, a smile he had read as gratitude, as need, as the particular vulnerability of a woman who had lost the most significant man in her life and was now leaning harder toward the next one. He thought about what that smile had actually been. And Roman Vescari, who had not made a genuinely unstrategic decision in 15 years, did something he would later understand was the worst possible choice he could have made in that moment. He picked up his phone and he called Celeste, and he told her everything, because she was the only person he trusted, and he needed to say it out loud to someone before it crushed him from the inside. He did not know that the phone line had been compromised 6 days earlier. He did not know that every word of that conversation was being recorded, transcribed, and added to a file that was growing day by day in a secure server in a building outside Geneva. He did not know that Imani, sitting in a high-backed chair in a warm room with rain against the windows, rain, always rain, as though the weather had decided to be consistent about this, was reading a transcript of his conversation with Celeste in real time, her face perfectly still, her coffee going cold beside her, while across the room a man named Grant Mercer watched her read it and waited to hear what she wanted to do next. She finished reading. She set the transcript down. She looked out at the rain for a moment, then she looked at Grant. "He told her about the ledger," she said. "Yes. He thinks I have it." "He's right," Grant said. "You do." "He's going to go to the council," she said. Not a question, not alarm, just the flat recognition of an inevitable sequence, the way you acknowledge the weather when it's already raining and there's nothing to be done about the rain except decide where to stand. "That's my assessment," Grant said. Imani picked up her coffee, registered that it was cold, set it back down. "Then we don't have as much time as I thought," she said. "No," Grant said. "We don't." She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the city that was not her city, the gray sky and the wet streets, and the lights coming on in the buildings across the way as the afternoon gave way to evening, and she thought about a hallway outside a private lounge, and rain on Manhattan windows, and a card she had written in her own careful handwriting that said, "I still choose you." She was not that woman anymore. She was not entirely certain yet who she was instead, but she was standing in Geneva with her father's ledger and a man who knew how to protect her and the financial infrastructure of a criminal empire that everyone assumed belonged to someone else. And the man who had used 3 years of her life as a strategic instrument had just told his mistress everything on a compromised phone line because he was afraid and he didn't have anyone else to call. She thought, "You never saw me." She thought, "That ends now." She turned away from the window. "Tell me everything you know about the dock workers' union," she said, "and then tell me who holds Roman's personal debt." Grant Mercer did not sleep much. Imani had noticed this in the 10 days she had been at the estate, a converted farmhouse 40 minutes outside Geneva that Solomon had purchased through a holding company in 2019, and never mentioned to anyone, including Roman, including her, until the letter. Noticed it the way you notice things about people you're suddenly dependent on for your physical safety, which is to say with a thoroughness that has nothing romantic about it and everything practical. He was awake before her each morning. He was still working when she went to bed. He drank coffee in quantities that would have hospitalized a less disciplined person, and he moved through the house with the particular economy of someone who had spent years in environments where excess motion was a liability. He was 51, built like a man who had stayed in the shape his work required without making it a personality, with gray at his temples and a scar along his left jawline that he had never explained and she had not asked about. Solomon had hired him 8 months before his death, which meant Solomon had known, 8 months out, that things were going to go the way they went. She thought about that sometimes. Her father, sick and certain and methodical, building the architecture of her protection while sitting across from Roman at dinner tables and shaking his hand at business meetings and giving absolutely nothing away. She had inherited more from Solomon than she'd understood while he was alive. Grant had spent the 3 days since the phone call with Roman assembling what he called a situation map, which was exactly what it sounded like. A physical map of the relevant players, their relationships, their pressure points, and what each of them stood to lose if the wrong information reached the wrong people at the wrong moment. It covered most of one wall of the estate's ground floor office, and it was, Imani thought, looking at it on the morning of the 11th day, one of the most clarifying things she had ever seen. It showed her very precisely how many people wanted something from her. It also showed her something she had not fully understood until she saw it laid out in Grant's careful handwriting across a 6-foot stretch of wall. The organization that Roman served, not the minor criminal affiliations, not the business arrangements that existed at the edge of legality, but the actual governing structure beneath all of it. The council that had been running the waterfront operations since before Roman was relevant was significantly larger than Solomon had let on in his letter. She was standing in front of the wall drinking her first coffee of the morning when Grant came in and stood beside her and said nothing for a moment. "How long has the council known about me?" she said. "Since Roman called Celeste," Grant said. "That was 4 days ago." "Yes." She took a sip of coffee. "And you're telling me now?" "I'm telling you now because the information I needed to verify before telling you took 4 days to verify," Grant said, not apologetically. He didn't do apologetic. "I don't tell you things until I know they're accurate. That's the arrangement." It was the arrangement. She had agreed to it because Grant had explained very clearly in their first real conversation that the most dangerous thing she could do was make decisions based on incomplete information presented as though it were complete. Solomon apparently had insisted on the same standard. "What did you verify?" she said. Grant pointed to a cluster of names on the right side of the wall, connected to a central name by 3 lines of different colors. The central name was Vincent Marzano, and Imani had seen it before, in Solomon's files, attached to the kind of history that made you want to wash your hands after reading. Marzano called a council session the day after Roman talked to Celeste, Grant said. Agenda item: the Whitaker ledger and the question of whether its current holder represents a manageable situation or an existential one. Imani looked at the name. Marzano, 73 years old, according to Solomon's files, had been running the Northeastern Council for 11 years. The kind of man who had survived as long as he had by being, above all other things, practical. "What did they decide?" she said. Grant was quiet for a moment. She looked at him. "They decided," he said, "that you are an existential situation." She set her coffee down on the edge of the desk. "They're sending someone," she said. "They've already sent someone," Grant said. 3 people, actually. They landed in Geneva yesterday afternoon. I've had eyes on them since the airport." Imani stood very still. She was aware of her own breathing, the specific quality of it, the way it had not changed, even though what Grant had just told her was the kind of information that should have changed it. She cataloged this awareness without judgment. She had spent 11 days becoming a different person than she had been in Manhattan, and the breathing was part of it. The stillness was part of it. "How much time do we have?" she said. "They don't know this location yet," Grant said. "They know Geneva. They know the banking firm. They'll work outward from there. Depending on how good they are, and these are council people, so we assume competent, 48 hours. Maybe 72. And your security here is better than they're expecting," Grant said. "This house has not been registered in any name connected to Solomon, you, or me. The perimeter has 4 points of monitoring. I have 2 people I trust on the grounds." He paused. "I want to be clear with you about something." She looked at him. "We can harden this location and wait," he said, "or we can move. Both options have costs. Moving means exposure during transit. Staying means managing an assault on terrain we control. I have a recommendation, but this is your decision." "What's your recommendation?" "We stay," he said, "and we let them come." She picked her coffee back up. It had gone lukewarm. She drank it anyway. "Okay," she said. She called Roman that afternoon. Not because Grant suggested it. Grant had presented it as an option, neutrally, and left the room to give her space to decide, which she appreciated more than she knew how to say to him. She called Roman because she had been thinking, since the wall and the situation map, and the name Marzano, about the specific geometry of the problem she was now inside. And the geometry had a piece in it that she hadn't fully accounted for. Roman was afraid. Not in the way that weak men were afraid. Not paralyzed, not irrational. Roman's fear was the functional kind, the kind that made him precise and quick and willing to do things he might otherwise hesitate over. She had seen it operate at a distance through the last 3 weeks, in the phone calls and the frozen accounts, and the conversation with Celeste on the compromised line. He was moving faster now than his normal tempo, cutting corners he would normally protect, talking to people he would normally keep separated. She had set something in motion that was moving the way she intended, but Marzano was a variable she had not fully priced. She sat in the chair by the window with the rain coming down outside, and she called Roman's cell. He answered on the first ring. The silence after the connection opened lasted exactly 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds she could hear him deciding how to play it, which told her that he was not so far gone into fear that he had lost his professional reflexes, which was both reassuring and a problem. "Imani," he said. Not "where are you?" Not "what are you doing?" Just her name, in a tone she could not immediately classify, which was unusual because she had spent 3 years learning his tonal vocabulary. "Roman," she said. "Are you safe?" he said. She blinked. Of all the things she had prepared herself for him to say, that was not among them. She had prepared for anger, for the specific performance of wounded dignity that he was capable of, for negotiation presented as reconciliation. She had not prepared for that. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was not going to let 2 words knock her off her axis, "Are you?" A pause. "I've had better weeks," he said. Despite everything, despite the hallway outside the lounge, despite the ring on the nightstand, despite the wall in the Geneva office with his name connected to Marzano's by a red line, something shifted in her chest at his voice. Not love. She was clear-eyed enough by now to know it wasn't love. It was something else, some older response, trained into her by 3 years of proximity to a man whose attention, however strategic its origins, had been real in its texture. She noted the feeling, identified it, and set it aside. "I know about this council session," she said. Another pause, longer this time. "How?" "That's not the conversation," she said. "The conversation is, you went to Marzano, you told him about the ledger, and now 3 people who work for him are in Geneva looking for me." She heard him breathe. "I didn't tell him to send anyone," Roman said. And the frustrating thing was that she believed him, because she had spent enough time studying him to know when his voice had the particular flatness of a man telling the truth about something he wished were otherwise. "You told him I had something that could destroy him," she said. "What did you think he was going to do?" "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought I was buying time." "You bought 48 hours, she said, "and now you've made both of us targets." Silence. "Both," he said. "You gave him a reason to worry about what you know too, Roman. You were in that structure for 3 years. You know names. You know accounts. You know arrangements. You just walked into a council session and reminded him of that." She paused. "How long do you think it takes a man like Marzano to go from sending 3 people after me to deciding it's more efficient to simply remove every complication at once?" She heard him put down whatever he was holding, glass on a hard surface. "You're saying he's coming for me too," he said. "I'm saying he's already thinking about it," she said, "which means the useful question isn't whether we hate each other. It's whether we can do something about it before it becomes irrelevant." She waited. She watched the rain on the window. "What are you proposing?" Roman said. "I'm not proposing anything yet," she said. "I'm assessing. I'll call you again in 24 hours. She paused. "Don't contact the council. Don't contact Marzano. Don't make any financial moves. Don't call Celeste. You know about Roman." She said his name the way he had once said hers, as a complete sentence. "I know everything. That's why you're going to listen." She ended the call. She sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the rain and let the adrenaline run its course through her system, which took about 90 seconds. And then she stood up and went to find Grant because there was work to do, and the 48-hour clock was running. The 3 people Marzano sent arrived on a Thursday night. Imani knew they were coming 4 hours before they did, because Grant's perimeter monitoring was better than they were expecting, which was exactly what Grant had told her, and which she had believed, but the believing of it, and the sitting in a lit room knowing that 3 trained people were moving toward the house through the dark were not quite the same experience. She was in the kitchen when Grant came and told her. She was making tea, not because she wanted tea, but because her hands needed something to do, and the physical process of it, water in the kettle, kettle on the element, the specific wait for the boil, was something she could control completely. 2 hours, Grant said. They're coming in from the north side. One vehicle, stopped about a kilometer out. They'll walk in. Your people. In position. She nodded. She poured water over the tea bag and watched the color spread. I need to ask you something, Grant said. She looked at him. If it goes the way I expect it to go, he said, we'll have at least one of them available for a conversation afterward. The evidence I'm collecting tonight connects back to the council, but a verbal confirmation from one of Marzano's people about who authorized this would make what we have significantly more usable. Usable how? She said. Usable in a way that doesn't require the ledger to be the only leverage, he said. Usable in a way that protects you going forward, rather than just stopping tonight. She understood what he was saying. I was saying that this night could be more than a defense. It could be the foundation of something offensive. Do what you need to do, she said. Grant looked at her for a moment, not assessing, she thought, more like he was making sure she understood what she'd said. Then he nodded and left the room. Imani sat at the kitchen table with her tea and listened to the house. What happened over the next 4 hours she would later reconstruct from Grant's account, because she was in the interior of the house for most of it, in a room with no windows and a reinforced door, which was where Grant had told her to be, and which she had argued about for approximately 3 minutes before accepting that her ego about not hiding was going to have to lose this one to her survival. She sat in the dark room and she listened. There were sounds she couldn't fully interpret. Movement, once a sharp noise from outside that she told herself was not what she thought it was. Grant's voice briefly on a radio, a long silence. She did not move. She had her phone in her hand and she checked it every few minutes, waiting for Grant's text that was the all-clear signal they had agreed on. It came at 2:14 in the morning. 2 words. We're clear. She opened the door and walked out into the hallway and met Grant coming in from the back of the house. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, and there was something dark on his right forearm that might have been blood, and he was walking normally, which she took as the most important data point. Your people, she said. Fine, he said. Both fine. The 3. 2 are secured. 1 ran. He looked at her steadily. I didn't pursue. The one who ran will go back to Marzano and tell him it didn't go the way it was supposed to. That's useful. Useful how? Because Marzano will know this location is defended, Grant said. And he will also know that we let one person walk out of here, which tells him we're not trying to hide. We're holding ground. He paused. And the 2 we have are willing to talk. The younger one started talking before I asked him anything. What did he say? He said Marzano didn't just authorize this because of the ledger, Grant said, and something in his tone made her go still. He said there's a second reason, something Roman told the council in the session that he didn't tell you on the phone. The kitchen was very quiet. What did Roman tell them? She said. Grant pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat down heavily, the way people sit when they're tired and the news they're about to deliver is the kind that needs to be delivered sitting. He told them you have more than the ledger, Grant said. He told them Solomon kept a second set of records. Not financial, personal. The kind that document what specific individuals did, not just what accounts they used. Imani stared at him. And then he told them, Grant continued, where you keep it. The silence stretched. Roman told them where I am, she said. He gave them this region, Grant said, not this specific location. He doesn't know this specific location, but he gave them enough to narrow it significantly. She sat down. She had not planned to sit down. Her legs made the decision without consulting her. She looked at the table surface. There was a coffee ring from the morning, slightly oval, where Grant had set his mug down too quickly. She looked at it. Roman had told them. She ran the timeline. The phone call. She'd told him she knew about the council session, told him to sit tight, told him she'd call in 24 hours. And before those 24 hours were up, he had gone back to Marzano and given them more. Why? She made herself think clearly. Not through the anger, which was there, hot and immediate, but underneath it to the logic. Roman was afraid. Roman was practical. Roman had gone to the council initially to buy himself protection, and when that had started to look like it might not work, when she'd called him and made clear she understood his position, he had given them something more to buy more time. He had not known about the operation tonight. He had not known that giving them more would get people killed, almost, in a farmhouse outside Geneva. He had made a strategic calculation, and he had not had enough information to make it correctly, which was, she thought, the story of their entire marriage rendered in microcosm. But understanding why he had done it and being able to work with him going forward were two entirely different questions. How much do they believe him, she said. About the second set of records. Enough to want to find out, Grant said, which is what tonight was. Not a termination order, an information retrieval operation. They wanted to know what you have before deciding what to do about you. So they don't know whether the second set of records is real. No. She looked up at him. Is it real? She said. Grant held her gaze. Your father left 3 physical items in a deposit box at a bank in Lugano, he said. I retrieved them the week after you arrived. 2 of them you've seen, the trust authorization documents and the account access codes. He paused. The third is a leather-bound book, approximately 200 pages, handwritten. I haven't given it to you yet because your father's instructions specified that you should have functional control of the financial architecture before reading it. Because he believed that if you read it without that foundation, Grant said, it would be more likely to frighten you than to arm you. She stood up. She walked to the window and then remembered there were no windows in this room and turned around. Get it, she said. Imani. Grant. She said his name with a precision that surprised her, cut and placed like something with edges. I have been making decisions for 3 weeks based on partial information because you and my father decided to meter it out according to a schedule I didn't agree to. Tonight, 3 people came here because Roman gave them enough to find me. I am done being managed. She breathed. Get the book. Grant looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up and left the room. He came back 7 minutes later with a package wrapped in cloth, which he set on the kitchen table in front of her without ceremony. She unwrapped it. The book was exactly as he'd described. Dark leather, worn at the corners, the kind of notebook that serious people use when they expect to fill it. Solomon's handwriting on the first page, which she recognized from 30 years of birthday cards, and the occasional formal letter when he couldn't say something face to face. She opened to the first page and read the first paragraph. She stopped. She read it again. The kitchen was completely silent except for the sound of her own breathing, which had finally, after weeks of controlled steadiness, changed. The first paragraph of Solomon's book did not contain financial records. It contained names. Specifically, it contained a list of 12 names, and beside each name a date, and beside each date a location, and beside each location a description of what had happened there. 8 of the 12 entries described transactions, the kind that Solomon had been involved in facilitating across the span of 30 years, as the price of operating a legitimate shipping empire alongside people who were not legitimate. The other 4 described something else. She turned to the 4th entry. She read it. She put the book down on the table, flat, and pressed both hands on top of it, and looked at the wall and stayed very still for a long time. You've read it, she said. Not a question. I have, Grant said. The 4th entry, she said. Yes. Roman knew, she said. Roman was told, Grant said carefully. 3 years ago, before the marriage, Marzano told him as a condition of the business relationship. What Roman knew and what he did with that knowledge are separate questions. She looked down at her hands on the book. The 4th entry was dated 11 years ago. It described a decision that had been made, not by Solomon. Solomon had been presented with a situation already in progress and had made a choice about what to do with what he knew, a decision that had ended one life and restructured 2 others. The 2 others were Roman and Imani. She had always believed that Roman had found her at her father's charity event because of her father's empire. She had always believed the calculation was Solomon Whitaker's ports, Solomon Whitaker's unions, Solomon Whitaker's political leverage. The 4th entry told her the calculation was older than that, more specific, more personal. Roman had not simply married into Solomon's world. He had been placed there, by Marzano. 10 years before the marriage, Roman had made a mistake, a significant one, the kind that ends careers or lives in the world he occupied. And Marzano had covered it, had made it disappear, had held the debt ever since, quietly, using it to steer Roman's ambitions in directions that served the council's larger purposes. Marrying Imani had not been Roman's plan. It had been Marzano's. Solomon had known. Solomon had accepted it because the alternative, exposing what he knew, or refusing the arrangement, or trying to protect Imani openly, would have brought the council's attention onto his daughter directly. Instead, Solomon had played along and spent 3 years building a fortress around everything he had and putting Imani's name on it, knowing that the marriage was compromised from its inception, knowing that Marzano's hand was in it, knowing that when the endgame came, it would be his daughter standing in the middle of it. He had bet everything on her being able to handle that. She thought about the letter. She'll know when she's ready, and she won't need anyone to tell her. She thought about Roman at the dinner table 3 years ago, the night she had given him her father's charity event, and her attention and her certainty that someone was finally seeing her. She thought about whether any of what she had felt was real, and then stopped thinking about it because that question was a well with no bottom, and she did not have time to fall into it right now. She took her hands off the book. She picked it up. She held it for a moment, and she thought about everything it contained. And she thought about what it meant that Marzano knew Roman had told her about the council session, and that Marzano had sent 3 people here to find this book, and that one of those 3 people had just walked back out into the night to report that the operation had failed. By morning, Marzano would know that the assault had not succeeded. By morning, he would be making new calculations. By morning, the window she had, the 48 hours, the maneuvering room, the careful pace she had been setting, would be closing. She set the book down. She looked at Grant. "Call Roman," she said. Grant raised an eyebrow by approximately 2 millimeters. "Now," she said. "Tell him 3 people came here tonight and we held them off, and I know what he told the council, and I know what the council told him 3 years ago before the marriage, and I know everything. Tell him exactly that." She paused. "And then tell him I'm offering him one deal, one time, and after tonight the offer doesn't exist anymore." "What's the deal?" Grant said. She looked at the book in her hands, her father's handwriting on the cover. 30 years of careful record-keeping from a man who had understood, probably better than anyone, that the most dangerous thing you can possess is the truth about powerful people, and the second most dangerous thing is being the person they think has it. "Tell him," she said, "that if he comes here, not his people, not through intermediaries, him, in person, within 24 hours, I will give him the chance to help me dismantle the thing that's been running both of us since before we ever met." "And if he doesn't come," Grant said, "then I release the book to every federal authority with jurisdiction, and I take my chances without him," she said. "And Roman takes his chances without me, and we see which one of us Marzano reaches first." Grant looked at her for a moment. Then he took out his phone. The kitchen was cold. The tea she had made 3 hours ago was sitting on the counter, completely untouched, long gone cold. Outside, somewhere past the dark perimeter of the estate, the one person who had walked away was moving through the Swiss countryside toward a phone and a report that was going to change everything. Imani stood in the kitchen of her father's hidden house with a book that could destroy a dozen powerful men, and she waited for Grant to dial, and she thought, "This is not the life I planned." She thought, "But it is the life I have." She straightened her back. She breathed. And she waited to find out whether the man who had used her as a door was willing, finally, to walk through one she was holding open. Roman arrived at 16 minutes past noon the following day. Imani knew he was coming 4 hours before he got there, because Grant's contact at Geneva's main rail terminal sent a photograph of a man in a dark coat carrying a single bag, moving through the station with the careful, unhurried pace of someone who had been told to look like nobody in particular and was working at it a little too hard. The coat was one she recognized. She had bought it for him 2 Christmases ago, charcoal wool, because she had noticed his old one was wearing at the collar, and she had thought, she could remember thinking this clearly, standing in the store with the coat on the hanger, thinking, "He'll be cold this winter. I should get this for him." She had looked at the photograph for a long time before handing the tablet back to Grant. She did not go to the door when the car Grant sent brought Roman up the gravel drive. She was in the office, standing at Solomon's wall map, when she heard the car, heard the door, heard Grant's voice in the entryway conducting what she imagined was the most thorough and least apologetic security check Roman Vescari had experienced in his adult life. She heard Roman say something short and terse, heard Grant respond in the flat, uninflected tone he used when he was making clear that the response was not a negotiation. Then footsteps in the hallway. Roman stopped in the doorway of the office. He looked worse than she'd expected, which was something, because she had expected him to look bad. He had not shaved in at least 3 days. His eyes had the specific hollowness of someone who had not slept in a way that constituted genuine rest for longer than that. He He was wearing the charcoal coat and under it a dark shirt that was not pressed, which for Roman was the equivalent of another man arriving in pieces. He looked at the wall. He looked at her. "You built this," he said. "Grant built it," she said. "I've been reading it." He walked into the room slowly, the way people walk into rooms that contain information about themselves. And he stood in front of the wall, and he looked at his own name and the lines connecting it to other names, and the specific red line going to Marzano. And she watched his face while he read, and she watched the moment he found the entry she knew he would find, the one that cross-referenced a date 10 years ago, and a debt, and a name, and an arrangement. His jaw moved. "How long have you known?" he said. "About Marzano's hand in the marriage." "Since last night," she said. "About the rest of it? That you knew, that he told you before the wedding. Since this morning, when I had time to read everything in the book." He was still looking at the wall. "Imani, don't," she said. Not loudly, just with enough weight that he stopped. "Don't do the explanation yet. I need you functional right now, not apologetic. The explanation can happen later, or it can never happen, but either way it doesn't change what we're doing in the next 24 hours. He turned to look at her then. She met his eyes and she held them, and she did not look away, and what she saw in his face was not the Roman she had spent 3 years across the dinner table from, not the Roman in the restaurant with Celeste, not the Roman on the phone who had answered on the first ring and asked if she was safe with something in his voice she still couldn't fully classify. What she saw was something underneath all of those Romans. Something older and more stripped down. A man looking at a woman who knew every card in his hand and had decided to keep playing with him anyway, and not knowing what to do with that. "Okay," he said. "Sit down," she said. "Grant is going to walk you through what we know about Marzano's current position, and then you're going to tell us everything you told the council in that session. Every word, not the version you think is safe to share. Every word." He sat down. Grant came in and closed the door. It took 2 hours. Roman talked and Grant took notes and occasionally asked questions that were short and surgical and that Roman answered with a completeness that surprised her. Not because she thought he would lie, exactly, but because the degree of disclosure required a kind of exposure she had not been certain he was capable of. He told them about the council session. He told them about the specific language Marzano had used, the structure of the vote, which members had been present and which had sent representatives, and what the distinction meant in terms of how binding the decision was. He told them about the 2 members he believed were not fully committed to Marzano's position, and why, and what their individual pressure points were. He told them about the debt. He told it without preamble, which was its own kind of courage, or possibly just exhaustion. 10 years ago, a situation had gone wrong in ways that had ended someone's life and should have ended Roman's freedom. Marzano had intervened, had made the evidence disappear and the witnesses become unavailable, and the official record reflect a version of events that bore a particular relationship to the truth, which was to say none at all. And in exchange, Roman had become useful to Marzano in the way that people who owe unpayable debts become useful, which is to say, completely. The marriage had been Marzano's suggestion, the timing, the approach, the specific cultivation of Solomon's trust. All of it had been architected by Marzano and executed by Roman, who had by that point spent 8 years being steered and had stopped noticing the hand on the wheel. Imani listened to all of this without interrupting. When Roman finished, the room was quiet for long enough that the silence had texture. "Did you know he had records?" Roman said. He was looking at the table. "Solomon, did you know he was documenting everything?" "No," she said. "Did you?" "I suspected," Roman said. "That was part of why I needed the ledger. Not just the accounts. I thought if Solomon had been keeping records, they'd be in there, and I needed to know what he had before—" He stopped. "Before you discarded me," she said. He looked up. She held his gaze. "Yes," he said. She nodded. "Once." Then she stood up. "Grant," she said, "show him the Marzano entry." The plan that came together over the following 8 hours was not elegant. Imani had spent 3 weeks in this house learning the difference between plans that looked elegant and plans that actually worked, and the lesson was that the 2 categories had very little overlap. What they had was a set of assets: the ledger, the book, the recorded evidence from the night's assault, the 2 council members Grant believed were movable, and a set of constraints: time, geography, Marzano's awareness that his operation had failed, Roman's compromise position. The plan that emerged from these assets and constraints was messy and contingent and required Roman to do something that Imani was not certain he was capable of, which was trust someone else's timing. The core of it was simple. Simple the way that things are simple when the execution is what's complicated. Marzano had to be brought into the open. Not metaphorically, physically. He had spent 11 years running the council from a position of complete structural removal. He was never present when decisions were enacted, never in the same room as the evidence, never reachable through the conventional approaches that law enforcement used, because the conventional approaches required the kind of documentation trail that Marzano was meticulous about avoiding. Solomon's book changed that. 4 of the 12 entries in the book documented Marzano's direct involvement in specific events, not through intermediaries, not through the chain of delegation he maintained for everything else. Direct, personal. The kind of involvement that men like Marzano permitted themselves only when the stakes were high enough that they didn't trust anyone else with the execution. The book documented the stakes. The book documented what Marzano had done personally and why, and what he had said to the people who were present. Solomon had been one of the people present. The plan required Marzano to believe that Imani was willing to make a deal, that she was frightened enough after the assault to want an exit, that the ledger and the book could be transferred to council control in exchange for her safety and Roman's. The plan required him to come personally because he would not trust a transfer of that magnitude to anyone else. The plan required Roman to be the one to call him. "He'll know it's a setup," Roman said. They were at the kitchen table, which had become their working table, covered in papers and Grant's careful notations and 2 empty coffee cups and one that Imani kept refilling and Roman kept not drinking from. "Maybe," Grant said, "but he'll also know that the alternative is you and Imani cutting a deal with federal investigators without him, which exposes everything and ends with him in a room with no exits." "He's been in situations like this before," Roman said. "He doesn't panic." "He doesn't panic when he's in control," Imani said. "He's not in control right now. He sent 3 people to retrieve something, and one of them came back alone. That's not a situation he planned for." She paused. "He's going to be angry. Angry men with enormous amounts to lose are not as careful as they think they are." Roman looked. "You're counting on him making a mistake," he said. "I'm creating the conditions where a mistake is the path of least resistance," she said. "That's different." He was quiet for a moment. "Where?" he said. "Brooklyn," Imani said. He stared at her. "That's his territory," he said. "It's where he's comfortable," she said. "Which means it's where he'll agree to meet. And Grant has contacts there who have been in place longer than Marzano's people." She met Roman's eyes. "He needs to believe he has the advantage. That's the only way he walks into a room with us." "He won't walk into a room with you," Roman said. "He'll send someone to collect the materials, and he'll come himself," she said, "because I'm going to tell you to tell him that I won't transfer anything to an intermediary, that I have the complete package ready to hand over, but only in person, only to him, because I need to hear from him directly that the deal is binding." She paused. "He'll think that's fear. He'll think I'm an amateur who doesn't understand how these things work and who needs personal reassurance because I don't trust proxies." "That's exactly what he'll think," Roman said. "Good," Imani said. Roman looked at Grant. Grant gave him nothing back. Roman turned his coffee cup in his hands twice, a rotation each way, a small, restless gesture that Imani had seen him make at their kitchen table 100 times when he was working through something he didn't like the shape of. "If this goes wrong," Roman said. "It can go wrong in 14 different ways," Grant said. "I've mapped 11 of them. For 9 of those 11, we have contingency positions. The remaining 2 end badly regardless of what we do." He paused. "The 2 ways it ends badly regardless are also the 2 ways it ends badly if we don't do anything. So," Roman set the cup down. "Call him," Imani said. Roman picked up the phone. Marzano agreed to the meeting in 40 minutes, which was faster than any of them had expected, and which Grant said quietly as they listened to the recorded version of the call playback, meant one of 2 things. Either Marzano was more rattled than they'd assessed, or he was already ahead of them. Neither interpretation was comfortable. The meeting was set for the following evening. A warehouse in Red Hook that Roman knew and Marzano controlled, which was a concession Imani had to make, because the alternative was Marzano not coming at all. Grant spent 12 hours before the meeting doing things with the warehouse that Imani was told about in outline and preferred not to know about in detail. She trusted the outline. They flew into JFK on forged travel documents that Grant produced with the efficient lack of drama of a man retrieving something from a cabinet, and Imani sat in the window seat of the commercial flight and looked at the Atlantic and thought about the last time she had flown over it in the other direction, 3 weeks ago, with her wedding ring in her coat pocket and her father's letter burning in her memory, and no plan at all, just a direction and a need to move. She had come a long way from no plan. She did not think this made her safe. She thought it made her dangerous, which was different, and the difference was not entirely comfortable to sit with. Roman sat across the aisle. He slept for 2 hours of the flight, which she found she envied. She had not slept properly since the night of the assault, running on the specific fuel of people who have too much to do and no margin for the body's inconvenient requirements. When he woke up, he caught her looking at him, and for a moment neither of them looked away. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and you can tell me it's not the time." "Ask it." "So when this is over," he said, "wherever you end up, will you be—" He stopped, looked at the seat back in front of him, started again. "Are you going to be all right?" She considered several responses. "I don't know yet," she said, which was true. "Are you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think I've been all right in a long time," he said. "I stopped noticing at some point." She looked back at the window. "Then maybe that's the first honest thing you've said to me in 3 years," she said. He didn't argue with that. The warehouse in Red Hook smelled of salt water and old diesel and the specific cold that comes off a river at night in November. It was 10 minutes from the water, which meant the wind found every gap in the corrugated walls and moved through the building in slow, irregular pulses that made the temperature feel lower than it was. Imani stood in the center of the main floor and felt her feet on the concrete through her shoes and breathed the cold air and waited. Grant was outside with 3 people she had not met before their arrival that afternoon. People who were his and whose competence she was choosing to believe in because the alternative was too exhausting to contemplate. Roman was 10 feet to her left, and he was still, which cost him something. She could see that. Roman's default in high-stakes situations was motion, pacing, the physical processing of tension through movement, and standing still required a discipline that showed in the set of his shoulders and the deliberate placement of his feet. She had Solomon's book in a case at her feet, not the real book. The real book was in a secure deposit box in a bank in Manhattan that she had accessed that afternoon, and what was in the case was a very good reproduction that Grant had arranged through means she had not asked about because she had learned when to stop asking about means. She checked her watch. Marzano was 3 minutes late. She heard the doors. Vincent Marzano was shorter than she'd expected. She didn't know why she'd expected height, probably because men who controlled things at his scale tended to occupy rooms as though they were larger than their physical dimensions, and she'd unconsciously projected that into an image of a tall man. He was 5'8" at most, thick through the chest, with white hair cut short, and a face that had the specific quality of a face that had decided, decades ago, to stop showing things and had gotten very good at the commitment. He wore a dark overcoat, and he moved with a slight favoring of his left side, a hip or a knee, something that slowed him minimally, but that she noted because she noted everything now. He had 4 people with him. Grant had told her to expect 3 to 6. She had hoped for 3. 4 was manageable. Marzano walked to the center of the floor and stopped 12 feet from her and looked at her with the specific quality of attention that very powerful, very dangerous people give to things they are trying to quickly, accurately assess. He looked at Roman. He looked back at her. "Mrs. Vescari," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, and very even. The voice of a man who had made a career of not raising it, because not raising it was more frightening than the alternative. "Mr. Marzano," she said. "I understand you wanted to settle this directly," he said. "I thought it would be faster," she said. He looked at the case at her feet. "Is that it?" he said. "Part of it," she said. He looked up. "Part," he said. "The ledger is here," she said. "The second set of records is in a separate location, accessible once we've confirmed the terms of the agreement are binding." His face didn't change. "We discussed the terms with Mr. Vescari," he said. "I know what you discussed with Mr. Vescari," she said. "I'm not Mr. Vescari." A silence. One of Marzano's four people shifted slightly to the right, and Grant's voice came through the earpiece Imani was wearing, very quiet. I see it. We have it. What are your terms? Marzano said. My safety, she said. Roman safety. Full immunity from any council action, now and going forward. In exchange, the ledger, the second set of records, and my commitment to remove myself entirely from any financial interest in the Whitaker infrastructure. Marzano looked at her steadily. You're asking me to give up a significant amount, he said. You're asking me to give up everything I have, she said. I think the exchange is proportionate. The Whitaker infrastructure belongs to the estate, he said, and the estate belongs to me, she said. We both know that. That's why we're having this conversation instead of you simply taking what you want. Something shifted in his face. Not much. A micro-adjustment, the kind of thing you only caught if you were watching for it. You know, he said, your father was also a very direct woman. My father was a man, she said. Figure of speech, Marzano said. I meant he didn't waste words, neither do you. He looked at Roman again. You trust him. I trust him to want to survive, she said. That's enough. Marzano nodded slowly. All right, he said. Let's see what you've brought me. He took 2 steps forward. She picked up the case. She unlatched it and lifted the lid and held it so he could see the book inside. He stopped 4 feet from her. He looked at the book. He looked at her. And this was the moment she had been building toward, the moment the entire architecture of the past 3 weeks had been aimed at, the moment she needed him to be exactly who he had always been. He reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone and said, Before we proceed, I need to make a call. Grant's voice in her ear, very quiet and very fast. North side door, 2 more. They were waiting outside. Roman was already moving, not toward Marzano, toward the north side door, which was 15 feet to Imani's right, and he was moving with a speed she had not seen from him before, physical and committed, the speed of a man who has decided that thinking is finished and action is what's left. The door opened before he reached it. 2 more men came through, and what happened in the next 40 seconds was not clean, and it was not controlled, and it was nothing like the version Grant had mapped in the 11 contingencies. Because what happened was, Roman hit the first man before the man had fully cleared the doorway, hit him with his shoulder and his full weight, and the specific desperate energy of a man with nothing left to protect except the next 60 seconds. And the second man came around and Roman went down, and Imani had approximately 3 seconds to make a decision. She made it. She closed the case. She looked at Marzano. He had not moved. He was watching the north door with the specific quality of a man whose plan is proceeding, and that was when she understood, fully, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives as a physical sensation, a coldness behind the sternum, that the 2 extra men at the north door were not a complication. They were the plan. Marzano had not come to make a deal. He had come to retrieve the book and remove the people who had it, in a location he controlled with overwhelming numbers, and Roman's presence had been the invitation that guaranteed she would be here in person. Roman had not betrayed her again. He had been used. She looked at Marzano, and Marzano looked at her, and he said calmly, Mrs. Vescari, I really would prefer this to be simple. And she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, even now, even here, with Roman on the ground and 4 men between her and the exits, you have no idea what simple is about to look like. She opened the case. She took out the book. She held it above her head with both hands, and she looked at Marzano and she said, loudly enough to be certain the recording equipment Grant had placed in the walls of this warehouse 6 hours ago, picked up every word. Vincent Marzano, you authorized an assault on a private residence in Switzerland on the 14th of November. You directed council resources toward the elimination of Imani Whitaker and the retrieval of documents belonging to the Whitaker estate. You are currently in possession of the knowledge that those documents contain direct evidence of your personal involvement in 4 separate criminal events, including the event of March 2014 that you have spent 11 years ensuring no official record of exists. Marzano had gone completely still. This conversation is being recorded, she said. The recording is being transmitted in real time to a federal investigator whose name and contact information I provided before I walked into this building. The book in my hands is a reproduction. The actual records are already in federal custody. She lowered her arms. She looked at him directly. You can take this from me if you want. It won't help you. The warehouse was completely silent. Roman, on the ground by the north door, had gotten to one knee. The two men who had come through the door were looking at Marzano. Marzano's 4 people were looking at Marzano. Everyone in the building was looking at Marzano. He stood in the cold warehouse light with his phone in his hand, and he looked at Imani Whitaker, who was standing in the center of the floor in a coat her father would never see, and holding a book that had already done its work. And his face went through something that she did not have a name for because she had never seen it on his face before and would not see it again. Then one of his people made a decision that nobody had authorized, the kind of decision that frightened men make when the structure around them starts to collapse, and everything in the warehouse moved at once. Grant's voice in her ear, cutting through the noise, was 4 words. Get down, we're coming. She dropped. The concrete was cold and hard, and she pressed herself flat, and she heard the north door blow open, and Grant's people coming through, and she kept her face against the floor and held the reproduction of her father's book against her chest. And she thought about a kitchen window in Manhattan, and a car pulling out of a garage and counting to 60 before she moved. She had come so far from 60. The noise lasted 40 seconds. Then Grant's hand was on her arm, pulling her up, and she came up off the floor with concrete dust on her coat, and her heart running at a speed that made the warehouse look slightly tilted, and she looked at the room, at Grant's people controlling the space, at Marzano standing with his hands visible and his phone on the floor, and his face showing the thing she now had a name for, which was finished. And she looked at Roman, who was upright, bleeding from somewhere above his left eye, breathing hard with one hand braced against the wall. He looked at her. She looked at him. You all right? He said. The words came out broken at the edges, oxygen-starved. Yes, she said. The recording, he said. Running the whole time, she said. He nodded. His head dropped forward for a second. Then he straightened. Grant was already on the phone, his voice low and rapid, and the way it got when the contingency work was shifting into a different phase. And outside she could hear sirens beginning somewhere in the direction of the water, which meant the federal contacts had been watching, and the timeline was compressing now, everything accelerating toward the moment when this warehouse would become a different kind of room entirely. She looked at Marzano one more time. He was looking at her with the face of a man doing arithmetic that keeps coming out wrong. The second set of records, he said. One last attempt. The reflex of a man who has spent 50 years finding the lever in every situation. You said they were already in federal custody. They are, she said. Then this is over, he said. Yes, she said. He breathed. Your father, he said, was a very careful man. I know, she said. Apparently, Marzano said, with something that in another man might have been the beginning of respect. So are you. The doors opened. The room filled with people who were not Marzano's, and Imani Whitaker stood in the center of a Red Hook warehouse in November with concrete dust on her coat and her father's reproduction book in her hands and sirens growing louder outside, and she felt the specific quality of a moment that is ending. Not a chapter, not a phase, but something larger, the end of a version of herself she had been living in so long she had forgotten it was a version rather than the whole thing. And underneath the exhaustion and the fear and the cold and the noise was something The sirens got louder, and then they were inside the building, which changed the acoustic quality of everything. The sound bouncing off the corrugated walls and the concrete floor and filling the warehouse with a frequency that Imani felt in her back teeth. She did not move from where she was standing. She watched the federal agents come through the main doors and the side door and the north door that Roman had hit with his shoulder 40 minutes ago, and she watched them move through the space with the particular organized efficiency of people who had been briefed and knew exactly who they were looking for, and she kept her hands visible in her breathing as even as she could make it, and she did not look at Marzano again. She had looked at Marzano enough. Grant was beside her within 30 seconds of the doors opening, close enough that she could hear him talking quietly into his phone, coordinating something she didn't need to understand the details of. And she stood next to him and let herself be still for the first time in what felt like weeks, which it very nearly was. A woman in a dark jacket came directly to Imani. Mid-40s, short hair, the face of someone who had spent 20 years being the person in the room who was right and occasionally being believed about it. She showed credentials. Miss Whitaker, she said, Special Agent Renata Cruz. We spoke on the phone. We did, Imani said. He said, "Are you injured?" "No." Cruz looked at her for a moment with the specific professional assessment of someone checking whether the answer is accurate. Apparently satisfied, she looked across the warehouse to where Marzano was being processed with the deliberate care that significant arrests require: 2 agents, handcuffs, a third standing slightly back, all of it unhurried, because unhurried was how you ensured nothing got thrown out later. "The recording came through clean," Cruz said. "All of it." "Good," Imani said. "The package we received this afternoon, the documents, is complete," Imani said. "Patricia Osei from the Delaware firm can verify the chain of custody. She's been expecting your call." Cruz nodded. She made a note. She looked at Imani again. "There's going to be a process," she said. "Say, statements, deposition, a significant amount of time before this resolves. You understand that?" "I understand that," Imani said. "Your cooperation has been—" Cruz paused, searching for the right word, and Imani watched her discard several before landing on substantial. "It will be noted." "I don't need it noted," Imani said. "I need it to hold." Cruz looked at her steadily. "It'll hold," she said. She moved away to manage the room, which needed managing, and Imani stood in the cold warehouse and watched them take Vincent Marzano toward the doors. He walked without resistance, which she had somehow expected, the specific dignity of a man who understood that resistance at this stage was beneath him and served nothing. At the door he paused, just briefly, and he did not look back at her, and then he was through the door and gone. She breathed. Roman appeared at her left shoulder. He had a piece of cloth pressed to the cut above his eye. She didn't know where the cloth had come from, Grant probably, and the bleeding had slowed but not stopped, and he needed stitches. She could see that clearly, though she suspected he was going to argue about it. "Cruz," he said. "Yes." "She's good." "She seems to be," Imani said. He was quiet for a moment. The warehouse was full of activity around them. Agents moving, voices on radios, the systematic processing of a scene that would take hours. And in the middle of all of it, they were standing in a small pocket of relative quiet, the way 2 people sometimes find themselves in the eye of something loud. "The book," he said. She looked down at what she was still holding. The reproduction. Grant's careful work. She had pressed it against the concrete floor with her body weight for the 40 seconds she was down, and it showed. The cover bent slightly at one corner, the pages compressed. She looked at it for a moment, then she handed it to Roman. He took it, looked at it. "This isn't the real one," he said. "No." He turned it over in his hands. "Where's the real one?" "Safe," she said. He nodded slowly. He handed it back to her. She took it and tucked it under her arm. "I need to give a statement," he said. "I know." "Everything," he said. "Not a version. Everything." "I know," she said again. He looked at her. The cut above his eye was making the left side of his face look worse than it was, and he was tired in a way that went past the physical, tired in the way that people get tired when they have been a certain kind of person for a very long time, and the infrastructure that supported that way of being has been systematically removed. "After," he said. "After what?" "After all of this. The statements, the depositions, whatever comes next." He paused. "I want to tell you something. Not an explanation, not an apology. Something I haven't said to you that I should have said a long time ago, and I know the timing is—" He stopped, started again. "I know the timing is terrible." She looked at him. "Not tonight," she said, not unkindly. "Tonight I'm going to sit in a room with Agent Cruz and tell her everything I know, and then I'm going to sleep for approximately 12 hours. Whatever you want to say can wait until I'm capable of hearing it." He absorbed this. "Okay," he said. Grant appeared. "We need to move you to a secondary location before you give the statement," he said to Imani. "The building is secure, but I'd rather not have you standing in the middle of a federal crime scene longer than necessary." "Give me a minute," she said. Grant gave her a minute by walking precisely far enough away to constitute a minute and then standing there. She looked at the warehouse, at the doors, at the river-cold November air coming through every gap, at the concrete floor where she had been flat on her face 40 minutes ago, holding a fake book and listening to Grant's voice say 4 words that had been, she realized now, the most genuinely reassuring thing anyone had said to her in months. Get down. We're coming. She had spent 3 years waiting for someone to come. She looked at Roman one last time. Go give the statement, she said. Tell them everything. Don't manage it. Don't shape it. Don't think about what helps you and what doesn't. Just tell them what happened. And then, he said. And then you'll know what comes next, she said. That's how it works. You do the honest thing, and then you find out what it costs. That's the whole formula. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. He walked toward Cruz's people. Imani watched him go. The statement took 6 hours. They did it in a federal building in Lower Manhattan, in a room with fluorescent lighting and a table that was too large for the number of people in it. And Imani sat across from Cruz and another agent whose name she didn't retain, and a lawyer that Patricia Osei had arranged, and she talked. She had not realized how much she had to say until she started saying it, and then it became clear that 3 years of very close observation of a man conducting complex criminal operations, filtered through 6 weeks of her own active engagement with those same operations from the other side, added up to an extraordinary amount of usable information. Cruz was good. She asked the right questions and let the answers develop and did not rush the parts that needed space. At 2 in the morning, she called a break and brought coffee and sat across from Imani in the empty room and said, off the record, your father's records are going to be what breaks this open. The financial documentation is thorough, but the personal records, the book, that's the connective tissue we've been missing for years. He kept it for 30 years, Imani said. Why didn't he bring it forward himself, Cruz said. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. Imani thought about this. Because bringing it forward would have required explaining his own role in some of it, she said. And because he was trying to protect me, and bringing it forward while he was alive would have made me a target before he'd built anything to protect me with. She paused. He was a complicated man. He didn't always make choices I would make, but he made the ones he thought would keep me standing when he was gone. Cruz was quiet for a moment. He was right, she said. Imani drank her coffee. He was right, she agreed. She finished the statement at 4:15 in the morning. She signed what needed signing. She was told she would need to be available for follow-up, which she agreed to, and that travel would require advance notification to the investigation team, which she also agreed to, and that the process of dismantling what Solomon's records had documented would take time, likely more than a year, and her patience would be required. She said she had patience. She wasn't sure that was true, but she was going to find out. Patricia Osei was waiting in the hallway when she came out. 60-something, composed, wearing a coat that suggested she had come directly from somewhere else at an unreasonable hour, which she had. She shook Imani's hand with both of hers, which was the first genuinely warm physical gesture anyone had directed at Imani in weeks, and Imani felt the unexpected sting of it behind her eyes and blinked it back. Your father would be satisfied, Patricia said. Satisfied, Imani said. He wasn't a man who used words like proud, Patricia said. Satisfied was as high as the register went. She paused. He was satisfied about you specifically. He told me so, in that last meeting, when we finalized the estate structure. He said, she'll find her way through it. I said, how do you know? He said, because she always found her way through everything. I just never made it easy enough for her to see that she was doing it. Imani looked at the hallway wall. She let herself have 30 seconds of that. Then she thanked Patricia, confirmed their next communication, and walked out of the federal building into a Manhattan night that was turning slowly and reluctantly toward morning. Grant was outside. Of course he was. You should sleep, he said. I know, she said. I have a car. I know, she said. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold. The street was empty except for a cab moving slowly through the intersection at the far end of the block, and a delivery truck parked against the curb with its hazard lights going, orange pulses in the dark. What happens to you now? She said. Grant considered this. My contract with the estate concludes when the legal process reaches sufficient stability, he said. Probably 6 months. After that, I have other things. Other people's fathers hiring you to protect their daughters from bad marriages, she said. Occasionally, he said. More varied than that, but occasionally. She looked at the street. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. The way he acknowledged most things, simply and without embellishment, as though gratitude were a routine data point rather than something that required a response proportionate to its weight. She got in the car. The divorce took 4 months. Roman did not contest it. He did not negotiate terms, did not push back on the settlement structure, did not ask for anything except one meeting, which he requested through Patricia's office, and which Imani agreed to 3 months after the warehouse, in a coffee shop in Midtown on a Tuesday afternoon in February when the city was gray and cold and the windows were fogged from the heat inside. He was already there when she arrived. He had lost weight, not an unhealthy amount, but enough to change the proportions of his face slightly, to make him look less like the Roman of the Manhattan dinner tables and more like something underneath that she had occasionally glimpsed and never quite been able to hold. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected, and sat back down when she sat, and he wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, and he looked at her across the table and he said, "I know you said not an apology." "I did say that," she said. "I'm going to say it anyway," he said. "Not because I think it changes anything, because I've been carrying it around for 4 months, and I think it belongs to you, and after today I won't have the right to give it to you." She waited. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I was doing with the marriage, for the way I talked about you, for not—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "For not seeing you. That's the thing I can't get past. I looked at you for 3 years and I didn't see you, and I don't mean that as an excuse or a piece of self-pity. I mean it as the most accurate description of what I did that I have. You were in front of me and I chose to see something else." She looked at him. She had thought about this moment, had run versions of it in her mind over 4 months. The things she might say, the things she would not say, the specific quality of what she would feel when she sat across from him in a room that was not a warehouse or a federal building or a farmhouse in Switzerland. What she felt was quieter than she'd expected. Not forgiveness. She wasn't sure she would arrive at forgiveness, and she had stopped needing to decide whether she was supposed to. What she felt was something more like the end of a frequency. The cessation of a signal she hadn't realized she'd been tuned to until it was no longer transmitting. "I know," she said. "You didn't see me." "No," he said. "But I didn't see you either," she said. "Not clearly. I saw what I needed you to be, which is its own kind of not seen." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "I think we were both so busy with the versions of each other we needed that the actual people never really got introduced." He was quiet for a moment. "That's more generous than I deserve," he said. "It's not generous," she said. "It's just true." He looked at his coffee. "Where are you going?" he said. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "I haven't decided exactly where yet." "Will you—" He stopped, shook his head. "That's not my question to ask." "No," she said. "It's not." He nodded. They sat in silence for a moment that was not comfortable exactly, but was not as uncomfortable as it could have been. And outside the fogged window the city moved in its particular February way, bundled and hurried and indifferent to the specific small weight of 2 people sitting in a coffee shop concluding something that had begun in a very different winter. "Grant," Roman said. "What about him?" "He's good at what he does," Roman said. "Yes?" "Your father chose well." "My father chose very carefully," she said. "About most things." Eventually. Roman's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. "I gave a complete statement," he said. "Everything, the way you told me to." "I know. Cruz told me." "It's going to cost me," he said. "The immunity agreement protects me from prosecution, but there are things I'm going to have to give up, people who—" He stopped. "It's going to cost me." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry for that." He looked at her. The genuine surprise on his face lasted only a second before he covered it, but she caught it, and she thought, this is what it looks like when someone who decided early that they were not worth care receives it unexpectedly. She recognized the expression because she had worn it herself, across this same table from this same man, every time he had paid attention to her in the first year of their marriage. She supposed that was worth knowing about herself. "Take care of yourself, Roman," she said. She meant it. She stood up, she put on her coat, she picked up her bag. She did not look back when she walked out the door, not because she was performing not looking back, but because there was simply nothing she needed from the room behind her that she didn't already have. The February air hit her face, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. The legal process took 14 months from the night of the warehouse to the morning. Imani received this final documentation from Patricia confirming that the last of the Whitaker estate's criminal entanglements had been legally severed. The assets that had been in contact with the council's operations had been transferred to government custody, and what remained, a smaller but entirely clean set of accounts and holdings, enough to constitute a real life rather than a financial empire, belonged to her, unencumbered. She read the email on her phone. She was standing in a kitchen that was not the Manhattan apartment's kitchen. It was smaller, with a window over the sink that looked out onto a street where the light came in at a particular angle in the morning that she had not stopped finding beautiful in 7 months of waking up to it. There was flour on the counter. There was a loaf of something she had been testing, a sourdough variation with a higher hydration than the recipe called for, which was still giving her trouble, cooling on a rack by the window. She had found the town by looking at a map and eliminating everything that had any connection to the life she was leaving. She had not used her own name in the lease or the business registration, both of which were handled through a new legal identity that Cruz's office had facilitated as part of the protection agreement. She had not told anyone where she was, except Patricia and Grant, both of whom she trusted with the information because trusting them had already been tested under conditions more demanding than a mailing address. The bakery had been open for 5 months. It was small, 8 tables, a counter, a kitchen in the back, that she ran herself most days with the help of a young woman named Dara, who had showed up for the job interview 40 minutes early and spent the waiting time reading a cookbook she had brought in her bag, which Imani had taken as a sign. They opened at 6 and closed at 2, and Imani was usually there by 4:30 in the morning, which would have been unthinkable to the woman who had stood outside a private lounge in Manhattan 14 months ago with a reservation card dissolving in the rain. That woman had not been a morning person. This woman was something that woman hadn't been, which was a list too long to inventory completely. Someone who knew what she was capable of when the conditions required it. Someone who had sat in a farmhouse in Switzerland and made decisions that had consequences and had lived with those consequences and had come out the other side not undamaged but standing. Someone who had made a deal with a man she didn't trust in order to destroy something that threatened them both, and had executed that deal with a precision that still occasionally surprised her when she thought back on it. Someone who had flour on her counter at 7 in the morning and was not apologizing to anyone about it. She set her phone down and read the email again. Then she set the phone face down and went back to the cooling loaf and pressed it gently with 2 fingers and listened to the sound it made and decided it needed another 20 minutes. She was filling the electric kettle when she heard the bell over the front door, which meant Dara was in, which meant it was 5:50, which meant she had been standing in the kitchen for 90 minutes without noticing the time, which happened more often than she could account for, and which she had decided to interpret as a sign of something good rather than something concerning. "Dough ready?" Dara called from the front. "Started it at 5, Imani called back. "The rye?" "Counter on the left. Don't touch the sourdough. It's still doing something I don't understand yet." She heard Dara laugh, which was a sound she had not known she needed in her days until it was there. She poured water over the tea bag and stood at the window and watched the light on the street outside, which was doing the thing it did at this hour, where the angle was still low enough that everything had a specific quality of not quite daytime, a threshold quality, the world on the edge of starting. She thought about the last 14 months. She did this occasionally, not obsessively, not as a form of self-punishment or self-congratulation, but simply as an act of accounting, the way serious people take stock periodically to understand where they actually are versus where they imagine themselves to be. She thought about the hallway outside the lounge and the ring on the nightstand and the flight to Geneva and the farmhouse and the book and the warehouse floor and the cold concrete under her palms. She thought about Roman across the coffee shop table in February, the surprise on his face when she said she was sorry, the particular look of a man who has spent a long time not expecting care from the direction it finally arrived from. She thought about her father. She thought about him often, and differently than she had while he was alive. While he was alive, she had thought about him as a fixed point, a given, the largest gravitational object in her personal solar system around which everything else organized itself. Now she thought about him as a person, complicated, strategic, limited in specific ways, capable of love in forms that didn't always look like love from the receiving end, capable of extraordinary care expressed through architecture and planning, and the careful construction of protections rather than through the words that would have meant more and cost him less. She had been angry at him for a while. She was less angry now. Not because the anger wasn't valid, but because she had arrived, gradually and without ceremony, at a version of understanding that didn't require her to resolve the contradiction. He had protected her, and he had withheld from her, and both things were true simultaneously, and the fact that they were simultaneously true was the most accurate thing she could say about him. She could hold both. She was getting better at holding both things. The bell over the door went again, which meant the first customer of the day, and she heard Dara's voice saying good morning, and the customer's voice saying something in response, and then the sound of the register and the specific small ritual of someone ordering coffee and choosing something from the case and the transaction, completing the way small transactions complete, without drama, without consequence, with the clean satisfaction of a thing done and received. Imani listened to this from the kitchen. She had listened to it every morning for 5 months, and she had not gotten tired of it, which told her something she hadn't been certain of when she signed the lease. She had not built this as a hiding place. She had built it as a life. There was a difference, and the difference was audible in the way she moved through the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning, purposeful and unhurried, doing the work because the work was what she had chosen, rather than because it was what remained after everything else was taken. The sourdough was going to give her trouble for another week. She could feel it. She was not bothered by this. She checked the clock. 6:05. Dara had unlocked the front door. The first customer was at a table with their coffee. In 40 minutes, the morning would hit its rhythm, and she would be moving between the counter and the kitchen and the tables and the small, continuous requirements of a business that was hers because she had built it, not because she had inherited it or married into it or been given it as a component of someone else's strategy. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at it. A text from Grant, who sent her a message approximately once a month, always brief, always simply a piece of information she might or might not need. Counsel prosecution timeline confirmed. Marzano's attorney filed a suppression motion. Judge denied it this morning. Trial date holds. She texted back. Thank you. He replied in 30 seconds. How's the bakery? She looked around the kitchen, the flour on the counter, the cooling loaf. The starter she'd been nursing for 4 months that was finally beginning to behave. The morning light in the window, which was doing something in the next few minutes that she had not yet tired of witnessing. She typed, "Still figuring out the sourdough." His reply came immediately, which was unusual for Grant, who typically let responses sit for hours. "You'll get it." She set the phone down. She picked up her tea. She stood at the window and watched the light on the street outside change in the way it changed at exactly this hour. The threshold moment giving way to something more committed. The day deciding to begin in earnest. The first customers beginning to move on the sidewalk outside. A woman walking a dog. A man in a jacket. She had learned over 5 months of watching this street at this hour. Stop and look at the bakery window and consider it. And then one morning soon walk in and she would learn his name and he would learn hers. And that was how you built a life in a place, customer by customer, morning by morning, name by name. She finished her tea. She set the cup in the sink. She went back to the counter, to the sourdough that was still giving her trouble. And she looked at it for a long moment with the patient attention that problems deserve when you are no longer in a hurry to have them resolved. And she thought, tomorrow. Tomorrow it might do something different, and if it didn't, the day after that. She had time. She had earned time. She dusted flour off her hands and went out front to help Dara with the morning rush, and the bell over the door was going steadily now, and the room was filling with the sounds of an ordinary day. Coffee, voices, the scrape of a chair on the wood floor, someone laughing about something outside. And Imani moved through it all and felt the specific weight of it, which was not heavy at all. She caught her reflection once, briefly, in the glass of the pastry case as she leaned across to answer a question about the rye. She didn't look away. She hadn't, for a while now. She answered the question, slid the case closed, and turned to the next customer, and the morning moved forward the way mornings do when you have finally, after a long time, at considerable cost, through more than you would have chosen, but exactly as much as it took. Stopped trying to be small enough for the space someone else decided you deserved, and started simply, without apology, taking up the space that was yours.